He's such a complainer. All right. Okay, let's see if I can actually.
Yeah, they like investing in stuff.
Morally and
Different
halakha.
companies do. So do the nothing. That's what pays for your son's, holidays.
Is it rotating? Isn't it rotating?
Pays for his skiing trips.
Okay, never mind. All right, let's start. Okay, we'll begin. It's a terrible view. Let's see if that's better. All right, that's a little better. Okay. All right, so we're starting a new module now, a new topic, morality and halacha, ethics and halacha. I'm very excited about this because I think we can do something a little bit new, a little bit different that people have done before. We're going to start from a more general perspective and talk about. We're really going to focus actually on one question tonight. That's a question that Rav Aaron Lichtenstein deals with in an essay that he wrote a very long time ago. It's the second essay in the second volume of Leaves of Faith, and it's called "Does Judaism Recognize an Ethic Independent of Halacha?" That's the title, and we're going to talk about that. But I would like, over the next, I don't know how many weeks, we'll go a little bit more wide-ranging, but also more specific. Other topics that I want to talk about are, is halacha actually moral at all? Do we expect it to be moral, as we, use the word moral and ethical? And then hopefully to look at actually specific halachot and mitzvot that maybe bother us or confuse us in terms of what we expect from God's will. I'm sure you can all think of examples. I can think of examples. I'll mention a couple. Maybe you guys can mention some others. Amalek is one example. Another example might be, let's say, just to throw it out there, shechita and things like that. That's what Ami was going to say. Anybody else have any other? We can write these down, so it's good. What other? What? Gittin, what? Oh, I see. Like, why is it the imbalance?
Today,
Imbalance,
it
right?
Seems like it's
Imbalance.
Korbanot,
different types of punishments.
Come on. This pen is not working.
Yeah.
Korbanot. This pen is really not working. Punishments.
Rabbi.
What about the punishments? Thank you.
Stoning. As a specific
Okay, in
example.
general. Stoning, etc. The death penalty.
Yeah.
The death penalty.
Yeah.
And what you're
Sota,
drinking.
good one. Sota.
Water, 7-Up, or Coke.
Any other ones? Even with regular halachot. Any mitzvot or halachot that make you uncomfortable as seem to be immoral or something like that.
Rabbi, shchita.
What?
Shchita.
Yeah, we covered Gittin, so I think that covers that. Yeah.
Shchita.
Slavery, yeah, that's a good one. I was thinking of that one. Slavery, exactly. Slavery. No, it's kind of fallen out of favor, but at some point it was in there. Anything else?
Shchita.
Okay, we did shchita. I got shchita. Okay. I'm just trying to come up with a list, and maybe even I'll also cover some of the stories in Tanakh that make us, uncomfortable. The stories about the brothers selling Yosef, or any of those stories that make us uncomfortable. Generally the understanding of war that we have at least in the Chumash. The Akedah. Yeah, we may actually dedicate a little bit to that whole question of the Akedah. Maybe even tonight, talking about the Akedah versus Dom. That's an interesting dichotomy over there. Okay, but before we get to all those things, I just want to talk about a general topic of morality and halacha. And I think actually we have a great springboard, aside from slavery that my father mentioned. We have a great springboard from the beginning of the parasha, the Rashi right at the beginning. First Rashi on this past week's parasha, Ve'ela HaMishpatim. So if you look at the sheet, you have it either on your phones or some of you have it on the paper. The first Rashi, he comments, Ve'ela HaMishpatim, Kol Makom Shene'amar Eila Pasal Et HaRishonim. Anytime it just says in the Torah the word Eile, Aleph Lamed Hey, it means it's a new list. In other words, we are now ignoring what we said before, and we're now having a new list. However, if it says Ve'ele, and these, then it means that it's a continuation of the previous topic. So,
It seems pretty obvious, doesn't it?
right, but the problem is, how is it a continuation of the previous topic? Ve'ele ha'mishpatim asher tasim lifneihem. Now, you may be thinking, okay, well, we just received the Torah. But the problem is that's not the last thing that happened at the end of Parshat Yitro. What's the last thing that happened at the end of Parshat Yitro?
The steps.
Good. It was the steps and the Mizbeach. A few halachot about the Mizbeach. So Rashi is going to address both of these things. He's going to say, what's going on over here? So Rashi says, Ve'ela mosif al rishonim, and Rashi says two things. Number one, he says, Ma rishonim misinai, af elu misinai. That's the first thing he says. What is the value of connecting, using the connecting vav? It's to tell you that just like all the halachot that we learned in Parshat Yitro obviously came from Sinai because we're at Sinai hearing them from God, so too all of these halachot that we're about to hear about, the Avadim, the Ama Ivriya, Midvar Sheker Terchak, all the laws about the judges and all those other halachot, those are also from Sinai. Of course, the question that you might ask at this point would be, well, why would they not be? Like, what's the Havamina? Why does Rashi need to tell us this? What would we have thought? So take a look at the end of Rashi. He says, parashat dinim leparashat mizbeach. Why are the dinim not directly after, let's say, the Ten Commandments? Why are they after the mizbeach halachot that Barbara pointed out? It teaches you that the Lishkat Sanhedrin is in the courtyard of the Beit Mikdash. It's right next to all of the korbanot that are happening. That's where the rabbis who decided court cases, that's where they sat. Why is that significant? It's significant for the same reason that it's important to juxtapose the mishpatim to the laws of Sinai. What might we have thought? We might have thought, okay, I have all these laws about slavery and damages and property law and all kinds of civil law. That's what most of Mishpatim is. If I want to decide how to adjudicate civil law, do I really need the Torah? I mean, British common law, I don't know, I guess it's somewhat based on the Bible, but it's a far cry from saying that it is the Bible. We don't really need the Torah to tell us that we need laws. And if we want to come up with our own laws, we probably could do a pretty good job of it. So one might think that the mishpatim, that's not the vicinity of the ritual, belief system of Judaism.
Couldn't you argue that about the Ten Commandments as well? That not killing and not stealing, we could have come up with those as well to run a...
In Achinami, 100%. Maybe that's why they had to also be juxtaposed to the first five, right? So, but this is what Rashi is saying. He's saying that Dafka wanted to put Ve'ele Mishpatim right after Sinai to tell you, number one, that they come from Sinai. Number two, that they are no different from the laws of the Mikdash. That's why the Sanhedrin is sitting there, because it's all of one piece. The laws of the Mikdash obviously come from God, and we wouldn't be able to come up with them on our own. We wouldn't know where to start. The same is true of the Mishpatim. The claim being made by Rashi over here seems to be that even the laws which are Ben Adam L'Chaveiro, that are civil laws, don't think that you can come up with them by yourself. You need God to actually tell you what these objective laws are. And I think we should discuss, whether we feel that that's, is that obvious? And do we really connect to that? So now, with that in mind, we'll talk a little bit about Rav Aaron Lichtenstein's article.
Amen.
So, this topic is, does Judaism recognize an ethic independent of halakha? And what he describes is, he says, do we believe that there is such a thing as natural law, which exists independent of halakha? And we could ask why it matters, and it could matter for a number of reasons. Why would it matter if there was or was not a morality independent of halakha?
Because there's a majority of the world that are not Jewish that
Right.
are bound by halakha.
Right.
There's one.
Right. So in other words, if there is no morality independent of halakha from a philosophical perspective, then it's hard to understand why anybody should just not do whatever they want. course, the counter argument to that might be, okay, well, there are at least 7 things they can't do. Maybe that's it, though. Maybe there's just 7 things that they can't do, and they have nothing to do with morality. They just have to do with divine command. The same way that we have divine commands, so they have divine commands. You might say that. Okay. Any other, does it matter?
Because morality could change. So in case it changes, you should know that it's based on halakha. It means
Should morality be able to change? I know that our understanding of it changes, but should it change? Isn't the idea of natural law supposed to be that these are objective laws? Shouldn't there? I mean, isn't that the
sometimes
claim?
they change.
It's the claim, though.
If morality is separate from halacha, then violation of morality carries no punishment.
You're saying
Very
if we
simple
can only,
punishment.
you're saying if morality is on a higher level than halacha. In other words,
No, I'm
if
saying-
morality
I'm saying
demands
I'm
more of us.
independent of halacha.
Okay,
If I violate halacha, I'm subject to punishment.
right,
If it's just a natural law,
right.
so I violated a natural law.
And there's a possibility that,
What are they gonna do to me?
well, who's they?
What is anybody gonna do to me?
Well, maybe, was God going to do anything?
If I violate a
Not-
non-halachic law,
Right, right,
I would imagine not.
okay.
Unless you're talking about civil
So I
law.
don't understand that. I don't understand that. So if you violate a tax law,
That's a
then
civil
you're
law.
going to get punished.
That's
That
a
could be
civil law.
halacha, if halacha covers it.
Well, there's
That's
If
a civil
halacha
law. I'm
covers
talking
it.
about
let's deal with
morality.
something like weights and
Morality
measures.
says I should have.
Yeah,
Morality
let's
says
deal
I have
with
to be a
weights
good
and
neighbor.
measures then. Let's deal with weights and measures. Let's say I charge you for something.
The
that's-
halacha talks specifically about weights and measures.
Right, but you're saying that, sorry, if there is no halacha, then you can't have any
saying-
punishment.
I'm saying
But we've got non-Jews
moral-
that
moral
don't operate
values.
to halacha
which are not part of halacha don't carry a punishment.
God.
from God. They don't
Even
carry
from God.
punishment.
I think what my father's suggesting is that if there were a situation where there was a
Civil law.
loophole,
If the law says I have to pay my taxes, that's not a moral value, that's a civil law. I'm not talking about a civil law. Moral value, I gotta be nice to you. I should say good morning to you.
Right.
When I see you, all right? And if I don't say good morning to you, I say, get lost every time I see you in the morning.
Right.
All right, that's not a moral thing to do, but it's you might argue it's a violation of halacha, I don't know.
but let's say we argued that it wasn't.
Let's say it wasn't, then that's not subject to punishment. There's no civil law that says I have to say good morning to you. And if we argue for the argument's sake that there's no halachic law that says I have to say good morning to you, then I violated, then I'm not subject.
So you're saying
to
there could be
punishment.
situations where morality demands more than halacha, and in those situations, perhaps we just say, all right, well, if you want to be nice, you can be nice, but you don't have to if you don't want to.
But is
There
it-
could be vice versa as well. Obviously, there could be that the halacha demands more of us than morality does. That wouldn't be surprising either.
Is there
That's what I would
such a thing?
expect.
Are we arguing that there is such a thing as universal moral law?
That's what we're wondering about.
I mean,
Whether it
in other
exists
words,
or not.
is it, I mean, I'm questioning whether it is universal, because there are different cultures, like the Greeks put the babies out on the hillside to die because
Right.
that's in their views that was moral.
So I would
So I mean,
assume
it changes.
100%, and in fact, is a Professor Steven Pinker, who writes about his studies of relativistic morality and morality between different cultures and the study of this kinds of morality, and he points out that there are a few core values, but they receive different emphases in different cultures. But I assume that, for example, a secular humanist who didn't believe in God but believed in morality, I assume that to his view, he is operating on an objective, universal plane of morality. Whether he is or he isn't, we can't say, but I assume he's trying to.
Things like the value of human life,
Right.
that comes from Tselem Elokim. It's become, we think of it as a universal moral law, but before the Torah was given, it probably wasn't. There was child sacrifice, and So I mean, I think it's very.
So you're arguing that there is none. There is none. There's no
I'm kind of
natural
siding
law.
with you. I'm thinking of all these like Brazilian, tribes. You've got African cultures that, they do kind of child sacrifice, or they'll.
But I
all
think
these
it's
different
interesting that we
strange
use that
things.
example. Let's be, let me be devil's advocate. What exactly is immoral about child sacrifice? What exactly is immoral about child sacrifice in those contexts, I'm just thinking of Indiana Jones. They're sacrificing the child to save the tribe. I assume that's what's happening. Right? They think that sacrificing the child is going to save the tribe or something like that. So what's immoral about that?
All right. What about rape in India and the way?
I assume the people who are
in
doing.
their culture where they
I assume the people who are
in
doing.
their culture where they kill females at a young age.
So I assume they don't think that that's right. Maybe they don't think it's wrong. Maybe is that your point? I assume nobody goes around thinking that's a mitzvah to rape people, but maybe they think that it's not. Maybe I think to rape people, but maybe they think that it's not. Maybe I think that.
Moral law.
I understand.
That's the basis of what we're discussing.
Right, I understand.
Whether it even exists.
It's
Right.
a different Korea. In China, they eat dogs.
Right.
We don't see eating dogs as being wrong.
Yeah, moral issue, I guess. I mean, eating dogs less moral than eating cows. Okay, so what Rav Aaron is discussing might be a little bit different than what we're discussing, because he wants to know. He's assuming that there is. He's assuming that it seems pasha to him that there is such a thing as morality, independent of halakha, so to speak. Independent of halakha, so to speak. He actually goes through a few different stages. At first blush, he says, of course there's such a thing as morality, of course there's such a thing as the right thing to do and the wrong thing to do, and we can figure it out generally speaking, we can get the kind of the contours just with our minds. That's what he assumes. Which I think we do agree with that. In other words, if you stopped a child on the street and said, is it right to kill people or is it wrong to kill people? I assume that 99 out of 100 children will say it's wrong to kill people. And that's pretty basic, right? Now, when you get into smaller questions and more detailed questions, obviously it's going to get more difficult. But the idea that there is a wrong thing to do and a right thing to do, that we identify as that most people are capable of coming to that conclusion. However, how does halakha deal with that? So I put some. How does halakha deal with that? So I put some. It's a long article. I'm not going to read all of it, but I just wanted to read some of it. So he says, on another level, we are confronted by an issue of far wider scope. The question is not what vestiges of natural morality continue to bind the Jew, or to what extent receiving the Torah abrogated antecedent ethic. It is rather whether the demands, guidelines of halakha, quite apart from the ground common to natural and halachic morality, are both so definitive and so comprehensive as to preclude the necessity for, and therefore in a sense the legitimacy of any other ethic. So what he means is that once we have halakha, might we not say that it covers so much ground that it makes morality irrelevant? In other words, we don't need morality because halakha tells us what to do in every single situation. So who needs morality anymore? Even if it did exist. So he says, I assume first that halakha constitutes or at least contains an ethical system. This point has sometimes been challenged, here he's addressing. When we read the whole thing aside. He's addressing, when we view halakha, do we view it as being or at least containing ethics, or is it merely a collection of gzerat hakatuv? Right? Gzerat hakatuv means God said so that's what you have to do. Right? Gzerat hakatuv means God said so that's what you have to do. So when we look at the mitzvah of lo tirtzach, and I decide I'm not going to kill somebody even though they're annoying me, and I decide I'm not going to do it, am I supposed to be thinking to myself, I'm not going to do it? Am I supposed to be thinking to myself, I'm not going to do it because God said it's wrong, it's unethical to do it, and that's the prism through which I should see that mitzvah? Or simply, God said don't kill people, and I want to follow God's law for whatever reason, that's a whole different question, and therefore I'm not going to kill anybody for whatever reason, that's a whole different question, and therefore I'm not going to kill anybody. Is there like a flavor of ethics in that mitzvah? If there is, by the way, then what does that imply? Imply
There are natural morals. There are natural morals.
that what?
That others won't have to keep it.
No, I'm not getting that.
There's natural morals.
Exactly. In other words,
What do you say?
that there is such a thing as natural morality. Do we believe that when halakha tells us to do the right thing, do we believe that when halakha tells us to do the right thing, is that because it's the right thing? And it would be the right thing, maybe, even without the halakha. The halakha is just kind of putting a stamp on it and saying, yeah, you should do this. Or do we believe stamp on it and saying, yeah, you should do this? Or do we believe stamp? You have a collection. You have a collection of laws. This is what we have to do. The fact that it happens to resemble the right thing much of the time is luck of the draw.
Okay. Chicken and the egg.
That's the question.
Chicken and the egg.
That's the question.
I mean,
So he says, when you start looking at the sources, which we're going to do, so you kind of get a sense. He says, for example, if evidence were necessary, we need only remember the conflicting interpretations of the Mishnah concerning. If evidence were necessary, we need only remember the conflicting interpretations of the Mishnah concerning he who says, may your mercies encompass the bird's nest. Okay, that's pretty obscure quotation. It's actually a Mishnah in Brachot, that there's a machloket in the Mishnah about whether or not it's okay in davening to say, Al kansipur yagiu rachamecha, which means in davening to say, Al kansipur yagiu rachamecha, which means on the birds of eagles will your compassion will arrive, which is a way of saying that the mitzvah of shiluach hakan is supposed to be a moral mitzvah. In other words, we're trying to have compassion. So do we believe? In other words, we're trying to have compassion. So do we believe? And we're going to actually probably, I hope that we're going to have a chance to talk about this more in depth, maybe not tonight. Do we believe that certain mitzvot, it's the same question, have moral quality to them? Or are they just, like I said before, moral quality to them? Or are they just, like I said before, Gzirat HaKatuv, and there's a machloket in the Mishnah about this. Can you say that God's mitzvot are mitzvot of compassion, that he wants that he is compassionate, or that he wants us to be compassionate, that the mitzvot have an element of compassion. He is compassionate, or that he wants us to be compassionate, that the mitzvot have an element of compassion. And there's a machloket about that, about whether or not you should say that.
There are some mitzvot where an element of morality is not obvious. Maybe there is, and I can't see it, like paraduma. Maybe there is, and I can't see it, like paraduma. Where explain
So
to
that's
me where
amoral.
morality comes
That's
into-
amoral, I guess. In other words, am I using amoral? Yeah, amoral. Meaning it has nothing to do with, at least from our perspective, since we don't know anything about it. We don't know. It's the same way. It's the same as tzitzit. It's not amoral from. You don't know. It's the same way. It's the same as tzitzit. It's not amoral from from
Unless you look at Cis's
secular perspective.
Between the governor and there are different things that are connected there.
Pashut Pshat, the Torah says you're supposed to look at the tzitzit and remember your mitzvot. That's the purpose of
The
it.
dafka the way
So you're supposed to look at the tzitzit and remember your mitzvot. That's the purpose of
the
it.
dafka the way
So-
they shouldn't know where it is and whatever they shouldn't know where it is and whatever. There's morality.
Seder,
So-
but on a simple level, the same thing as let's say as Shabbat itself. The truth is, it's Shabbat has been seen as a moral thing. Mezuzah is a good example. Shabbat has been seen as a moral thing. Mezuzah is a good example. Mezuzah, we put in mezuzah so that when we look at it, we remember God, right? It's not from a secular perspective. It's definitely not moral or immoral, right?
Well, the exclusive, which is exclusive, to say that, certain of the laws may be the expectation of what humans would do to one another, and it so happens that afterwards came along, it was codified.
So that's what we're wondering. So that's exactly what we're wondering, because that would have other implications. Because maybe there are other things, implications. Because maybe there are other things that are good things to do that the Torah doesn't tell us about.
let's say there were codifications before, rules of the law before the Torah that did include some of the things that the Torah
Okay,
speaks
There
about.
were.
yeah, and you're right, there were.
Exactly, so I'm saying, so therefore if they did exist before.
Yeah. And you're right, there were.
Exactly, so I'm saying, so therefore if they did exist before.
Good. So Rav Lichtenstein. Good. So Rav Lichtenstein is going to get really into the guts of that. So before that, though, he points out another source. One might cite numerous primary texts by way of rebuttal. A single verse in Jeremiah should suffice. But let him that glorieth glory in this, that he understandeth and knoweth me, for I am. But let him that glorieth glory in this, that he understandeth and knoweth me, for I am the Lord who exercise mercy, justice, and righteousness in the earth. For these I desire, says the Lord. We have words in Tanakh that strongly connote morality. Chesed, rachamim, tzedek, mishpat. Chesed, rachamim, tzedek, mishpat. These are words that we're familiar with, that are secular words. They're words that we understand. You don't need religion to understand these words, and they imply that these are values that the Torah has, and God identifies himself with these values. Chanun are values that the Torah has, and God identifies himself with these values. Chanun, Rachum, Rachum.
Secular values.
What?
Why did you say they're secular values?
By secular, I don't mean anti-religious. I mean do not require religion to understand them. The idea of compassion.
It's like
There are words that
I
exist.
disagree. I think human.
It's
like
there are words that
I
exist.
disagree. I think human nature. It's like it says. It's like it says. Thank God for the government. Otherwise, people would kill each other.
Yes,
You know?
it does.
I mean, human nature. I think it's taking a very favourable view of human nature to make this assumption that without
It's taking the most favorable. It's taking the most favorable view of human nature, and applying that to God. That's what's happening in Yirmiyahu, right? Yirmiyahu is God saying, "I'm Chesed." It's not, the Tanakh is not going to say that all men are good. No, of course not. But there are men who are good, and their good qualities are Chesed, Mishpat, Tzedek. These are good things, right? Parents feel towards their Chesed, Mishpat, Tzedek. These are good things, right? Parents feel towards their children most of the time, love and compassion. And towards their friends, they want to help them. They want to give tzedakah. People feel compelled to give tzedakah. Not only religious people feel that compulsion. Other people feel that compulsion as well to help, to be. Other people feel that compulsion as well to help, to be a force for good. We don't always feel it. We probably mostly don't feel it. But it's definitely something good, and the Torah is trying to encourage it. But by virtue of the fact that it's trying to encourage it, it means it exists. That's what Rav Lichtenstein is arguing.
Is that a nature of our education systems? Right, and the wider education systems. Right, and the wider education systems.
So you'd have to look at child psychology, and I think the conclusion they've come to is no, that children have innate sense of at least justice. Children have innate senses of justice. They have. I remember it was on like 60 Minutes or something like that, where they had this woman who was. They would do a puppet show. I remember this. They would do a puppet show in front of like children, like I think 6 months old even or something. I don't know if that's right, but really, really, really young. And in the puppet show, one person would have an object, and then someone would come and grab it, take it away. And then someone else would come and I don't know, they would hit the person over the head or something. They would basically take it back from them and give it back to the original owner. And the children were happy when it happened. In other words, they had this sense that something was wrong, and then when it was corrected, they were happy. They didn't like the bad guy. Can identify a bad guy. No, there's some sociopaths who can't.
6 months.
Well, I guess it wasn't 6 months, but it was very young, before they had been taught anything. Now, in the second column, he says something important. He says, second, I assume that at most we can only speak of a complement to halacha, not of an alternative. Any ethics so independent of halacha as to obviate or override it clearly lies beyond our pale. In other words, we're not talking about ethics overriding halacha. We'll see what that means in a little bit. There are, of course, situations in which ethical factors like the preservation of life, the enhancement of human dignity, the quest for communal or domestic peace, and the mitigation of anxiety or pain sanction the breaching by preemptive priority or outright violation of specific norms. Right? Pikuach nefesh, shalom sometimes will override other halachot. However, these are themselves halachic considerations. Okay, I'm not going to read the whole thing inside, but basically the direction that Rav Lichtenstein goes through now is to say, okay, this stuff does exist, but guess what? Halacha swallows it up. In other words, all that good stuff, all that morality, Halacha incorporates it into itself. And we'll see where he gets that from. So now he says, the question is whether halacha is self-sufficient, and how we relate to things that the halacha does not seem to cover explicitly. Even within halacha, he acknowledges that there are certain things that are din, that are technical laws that you cannot get out of them, and then there seems to be something called what he calls, or the Gemara calls, lifnim mishurat hadin. You're going to see in the Gemara, if we get to it in a minute, lifnim mishurat hadin. Lifnim mishurat hadin means something that's beyond the letter of the law. How do we relate to that? How do we relate to things that are beyond the letter of the law? How much are you obligated? Like saying hello in the morning, right? If the halacha doesn't cover that, so how do we relate to it? Are we obligated? Can we be punished for it? What do we do with it? Now that I look at it, Rav Lichtenstein's article is just too long for us to read inside. So let's look at some of the sources that he uses. Turn to the second page, or the second side of the page. We'll start with the Gemaras, because what I find is that you have, like in much machshava and philosophy, you can kind of trace a change in the way that Jewish scholars approach the topic of morality, like in many other topics. We saw this with Hashgacha Pratit, I don't know if you guys remember, and we're going to see it now, I think. Let's take a look at the Gemara in Eruvin. Gemara in Eruvin says, Rav Yochanan observed, if the Torah had not been given, we would have learnt modesty from the cat, honesty from the ant, chastity from the dove, and good manners from the kaku for coaxes and then mates. All right, basically saying that if we did not have the Torah, so we would have been able to look at nature, at animals, and we would have learned something from the qualities of each of the animals. What does that imply? Clearly, what?
There's a natural.
That there is natural law. It's so obvious that you could actually learn it from animals. Now, okay, honesty from the ant. Okay, I don't know. But they were looking at it from a certain perspective that we obviously don't look from now. But they're saying, it seems clear, I mean, incontrovertibly so, that they're saying that these things exist, that they are valuable, and that we would have been able to figure them out to a degree even without Torah. And it was conceivable for that to happen. Bava Metzia takes it a step further. Rav Yochanan said, Jerusalem was destroyed only because they gave judgments therein in accordance with biblical law. Well, that's a weird statement. It just said that Jerusalem was destroyed because they danu din Torah. Because they used the Torah? What? What are they supposed to do? Were they then to have judged in accordance with untrained arbitrators? What are they supposed to do? They just make things up? Say this because they based their judgments strictly upon biblical law and did not go beyond the requirements of the law. Apparently, there's such a thing as beyond the requirements of the law that they should have been doing. But then, of course, that begs the question: if it's beyond the letter of the law, then why isn't it part of the law? If that's what they're supposed to be doing, then why isn't it part of the law?
Because by keeping the law, that should develop a deeper, a more profound moral sense, so that it would become natural to go beyond.
Okay, that's a nice sentiment, but it sounds like they did keep the law, and it wasn't good enough.
Oh, okay, true.
It sounds like you had a bunch of people walking around who said, "Do I have to do it? Okay, if I don't have to do it, then no." Right? That seems to be what's going on. And then apparently there's something called the Fnim Mishurat Hadin, which they
were punished because of it.
Yeah, they're punished. We lost Jerusalem because of it. Now, this is part of a litany of things that we lost Jerusalem for. It's not the Gemara's whole lists for both Batei Mikdash about why we lost the Beit Mikdash, and there's lots of drashot about that. But it sounds like there's something beyond halacha or beyond biblical law at least. Now take a look at this one. The Gemara relates an incident involving Rabba Bar Chanan. Certain porters broke his barrel of wine after he had hired them to transport the barrels. He took their cloaks as payment for the lost wine. They came and told Rav. So he had workers. They were working for him, and they broke his barrels. So he took a collateral from them. Right? He took their cloaks, which seems to be within his rights. Maybe it's not within his rights, but you understand what's going on. Rav said to Rabbi Bar Chanan, "Give them back their cloaks." Rabbi Bar Chanan said to him, "Is this the halacha?" Rav said to him, "Yes, as it is written that you may walk in the way of good men." It's a pasuk in Mishlei. That's not a halacha. That's a pasuk in Mishlei. Rabbi Bar Chanan gave them back their cloaks. Then what happened? Porters said to Rav, his workers said, "We're poor people and we toiled all day and we are hungry and we have nothing." They broke his barrels. What are they asking for? Payment. Rav said to Rabbi Bar Chanan, go and give them their wages. Pay him. Rabbi Bar Chanan said to him, is this the halacha? Rav said to him, yes, as is written, and keep the paths of the righteous. Again, Mishle. Right? It's not halacha. But this is how he's getting, this is what he's being told to do. Now, that's not din Torah. It's definitely lifnei mishurat din. And it implies that there's something beyond the letter of the law, that there's some, aspirational moral that we're supposed to be trying to reach. That the note that the Mishlei describes. It describes it, but it doesn't legislate it. Gemara in Brachos. This is the counterpoint.
By Israeli standards, that would be a fryer, by the way. So,
Absolutely.
But you could have brought any pasuk.
There are lots of psukim that he could have brought. In fact, in other places they bring different psukim. For the concept of lifnei mishurat din, which I learned it once in the Gemara shir, that they brought a totally different pasuk, and we talked about. In fact, I'll just mention it. The Gemara in.
What I'm saying is that
I have it
you
here.
could have made up any decision based on any pasuk that he brought. So it's not actually the pasukim that are dictating what people should have shown me doing. It's the rabbi that's dictating what he should have shown me doing.
He's dictating it based on the sentiment that he gets from the Navi, and from
I'm
Tanakh.
saying he could have pulled any. I'm saying we have all the books. We've got a rabbi that reads them all.
It's his job to
His job
synthesize that.
To synthesize and pull it. So it's not necessarily. I mean, it's his interpretation. So
It's his job. It's Rav's job to synthesize all of that and come to a conclusion about what the Torah wants. And actually, I want